At this time, it is my honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Lady Brianne. Lady Brianne is an international spoken word artist, poetry coach, activist, organizer, and educator. During her time as a competitor in slam poetry competition, she has won numerous awards, including the 2016 National Poetry Slam Competition and the 2017 Southern Fried Regional Slam Competition. From 2015 to the present, she has represented Baltimore in a number of other national competitions, including the Individual World Poetry Slam and Women of the World Poetry Slam. Brianne is a recipient of the Open Society Institute Fellowship centered around her project, facilitating poetry workshops in prisons and group homes throughout Maryland. She also received the 2017 Salzburg Fellowship for Social Innovators. She received her Bachelor of Arts in Communications from Howard University and her Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing and Publishing Arts from the University of Baltimore. Please join me now in welcoming the incredible Lady Brianne to Montana State University.
Good morning, everyone. How are you all doing? Good. Okay, somebody over there is giving me energy. I appreciate you. Firstly, I just want to say thank you so much to Jamie and Chelsea and the Office of Student Engagement and just the greater Montana State community for inviting me here to be the keynote for this second annual Diversity Symposium. I'm really excited to be here. I know that sometimes keynotes can be dry and long, so I'm going to try really hard to not be that. And I also just want to say that I'm appreciative for all of you being here. I know conversations around diversity and inclusion can sometimes be uncomfortable, can sometimes be spaces that trigger different emotional responses from people. So I'm just grateful for everybody that is here. Even if the turnout is kind of small, I feel like these intimate spaces really produce the catalyst for change. And so thank you for all of you for choosing to be here. So clap it up for yourselves. Okay, so during this keynote, I really just want to do three things. First, I want to share some poems, because I am a poet, so it's certainly going to be just poetry littered throughout this presentation. The second thing is I want to talk a bit about my own background and who I am and how I come to this space. And then the third thing is I want to talk about why diversity is necessary and the function that it serves and plays. And then at the end, I can certainly be open for a few questions, to entertain some questions. So is that cool with everybody? If that's cool, say cool. All right, great. So to start, as a Black cis het woman poet, I wanted to start with a poem that's entitled Black Girl Beautiful. And I want to just say that I'm thankful for spaces like this where I can come and show up in the, fullness of my socio-political self. I think it's important to note the intricate intersectionalities of our identity. And for me, my womanness and my Blackness are the first two things that people experience when they see me. They're so interconnected and so inseparable that I don't believe I can be understood without looking at the interplay between those two simultaneously. And so I thought this would be a great poem to start with. Now, I am a spoken word artist, okay? And raise your hand if you've ever seen spoken word or if you are a spoken. Okay, so all right, so we got a bunch of pros in the building. Okay, great. So I asked because spoken word poets are particularly scared of really quiet rooms. Meaning, when we're performing, if we don't hear anybody affirming anything, we think we're doing something wrong or that the poem is bad, okay? So I'm gonna give you a few tips so you know how you can perform during the performance yourself, okay? So if there is a line in any of this presentation, but particularly during the poems that speak to you, that you agree with, that it hit you in a way that you're like, okay, I see what you did there, all right? One thing that you can do is you can snap. Everybody try it. All right, we got some expert snappers in the building. This is great, okay? Now, if a line hit you a little more than that, right, it really got you thinking, or you're like, I never considered that, or I don't know, it touched you a little more than a snap, it's worthy of more than a snap, you can make a real ugly face and say, everybody try it. All right, good. Now, there are a number of other things you are welcome to do. You can affirm in any way that makes sense for you. Go on, girl, say that. I hear you. I say amen. I don't know. Whatever works for you, you are welcome to do that during the poems. I appreciate it. Any spoken word artist appreciates it. So now that we got that out the way, I do want to start with, again, a poem entitled Black Girl Beautiful. Black girls be hidden behind primers, plastered on face to prepare you for the abusive punches thrown your way every day. Concealers conceal your fears. Waterproof eyeliner unaffected by your tears. Too afraid to let the world know who you really is. Girl, where is your spunk? Junk in the trunk don't make you special, girl. You get it from the ancestors. And loose girls can't stand straight because their foundation is liquid. But foundation should never be the foundation you build your life upon, because when it deteriorates, so will that relationship. If beauty is your gimmick, then soon you'll be irrelevant. So I'm saying black girl royal. Where is your robe and your crown, your gele and your gown? So you've been wearing the wrong costume. And people been mistaking you for a hoodlum, a hood rat, a pigeon, an alley cat, a good time girl, a floozy called friend with benefits. Respect is not an option. So get it on sight like eye contact, like don't contact me unless you got it, see? Because I got it on deck like self-respect, woman, you are queen. And baby girl is a princess, just a queen in training, so don't answer to any other name, even when it's your friends calling. That is a throne in the seat of your pants. And you are not queen because he is king. That scepter will never be an accurate measuring stick. The two are mutually exclusive, though it seems the higher up you go, the less double X chromosomes, so much so that even the God we worship has a Y. Still, the genealogical arc of history is etched on your thighs. The golden sands of heaven line the canal of your wombs. Your brother, watch how you speak to her. Humble yourself and worship her, because woman is the closest thing to God. The creator crafted Adam from breath and soil, but you were molded in a fertile belly. Your Eden was transmitted umbilically. So brother, I say worship her fervently, because a sister holds the sustenance to feed humanity in her breast. Comfort in her biceps with a back built to bear burdens and shoulders suited to uplift, cloaked in allure. And I'm sure you've seen her hips, but these full breast and wide hips get us ignored in every way that ever mattered and harassed, in every way we never wanted. See, our bodies have become bullseyes branded with lust, and everything we do is always too much. You see, a man can never be too masculine, because the more he is, the more valid he seems. But when you increase femininity, you decrease legitimacy, efficacy, and diminish our ability to lead. We are the ones who truly wear the masks. Pretending is our specialty, because to be black and woman in a white man's world is so troubling. We minimize our minds, trying not to emasculate the ego of the man who's been made fragile, tricked into believing that our greatness puts his masculinity at risk, as if two stars can't coexist. We must not compromise our very essence for this status quo. We gotta let the world know that us black girls must be considered equal. Okay, so here you have this black girl poet who grew up in East Baltimore, right, to a working class family. And a little bit about Baltimore, if you don't know, Baltimore is a predominantly black city that has a black legislator, a black city council, a black mayor, and historically is a city of resilient, free black people. And I say that because during the slavery era, there were 22,000 free black people in the city of Baltimore and about 2,000 enslaved black people. So, you know, from its inception, Baltimore has just been a super free, resilient black city. And still, at the same time, you can see very stark disparities and disenfranchisement in that same city today. because you can cross the street and the life expectancy rate will decrease by 25 years in certain parts of Baltimore City, right? Baltimore is also the home of redlining. And if you don't know that term, redlining was a policy that demarcated neighborhoods and systemically ensured white folks did not buy homes there, that lenders would not lend there, that insurance companies would not insure anyone there, right? That developers and investors were told those neighborhoods were unfit and unhealthy. And decades later, if you put that map over today's map, many of those neighborhoods are still demographically and economically identical, if not worse off, right? So that is that stark disparity in Baltimore. Predominantly black, a number of black people in leadership roles governing the city, and still that's the nature of the city that I come from, right? And so if I had to name, the top 4 things that people know Baltimore for, I would say Blue Crabs, the Harbor, the Wire, and the 2015 uprising. And even in that description alone, you can see the contrast, right? There are 2 Baltimores. And though many of you might not know the places or the neighborhoods, if you listen to the descriptions that I've given, you can really tell the difference, right? Because Baltimore is essentially like a set of fraternal twins, conceived as one, but birthed into 2, separated by a difference in characteristics. Don't believe me? Well, check the census, because half these neighborhoods been black and poor since Nixon was president, and it's crazy. In '68, they put a bullet through a king's dream, and in the streets were riots. 2015, a gray man is made a memory, and again, riots, because America is still on a predominantly dark meat diet in this city. There are multi-climate conditions. Concrete jungles, food deserts, fire hydrants are misting, while resources run low. But behold, an oasis of plush green trees and rolling parks exist in the land of condos. Just look at the windows if you want to see pain. The rich, no curtains, because they would never cover. But the poor use brown plywood as a cover, and you can hear the cricket-filled silence or police sirens bouncing off the walls of project housing. There are mansions in Guilford, while vacants in Gilmore, manicured lawns or weeds growing between the cracks of callous sidewalks when it's 2 a.m. On one side of town, you'll find a white woman jogging, a taut leash around the neck of her miniature schnauzer, let's say Sophie. But on the other side of town, you'll find blue lights, cop lights, floodlights, cell phone lights in the hand of a young brother on the corner trapping, while the low light of hope is ever dimming. And Johns Hopkins medical campuses forever sprouting, touting, revitalization smiling through crest white teeth, while the aching teeth of the poor can feel gentrification in their dilapidated communities, decaying like cavities, but coffee cafes like Starbucks foreshadow a root canal for pennies. They'll uproot a mother, father, and child, then put colorful paint over a graveyard view. Just ask Greenmount what a Station North will do. Lead particles in the H2O or outdoor water fountains always aflow. Bike lanes or crater moon-sized potholes. Fiends penguin wobble to a street side lean, or prescription addicts with paychecks that keep habits fully functioning. There are some communities with flower shops, but others have floral memorials commemorating homies that got popped. Tennis shoes on light poles uplift fallen souls. Still can't see the distinction between 2 twins cocooned in the womb of the belly of the beast. It's easy as counting 1, 2, 3, just count the corner stores, liquor stores, and churches versus dog parks, guarded fences, and organic markets. The tale of 2 Baltimores has never been a secret, but there are some who are just too privileged to ever see it. All right, so, thank you. So, it took me years to develop that kind of analysis. I saw the disparity, but when I was younger, I couldn't name it, and I could not explain it, right? But I was fortunate enough to be networked in to the Black Genius of Baltimore that is often overlooked. So I'll give you a few examples. When I was in high school, I was a debater, right, a forensics debater, and I hear that there's a debate happening right now on campus. Anyway, that was a sidebar. So I was excited about it. During that time, I had a debate coach who really helped me develop a consciousness around race relations and advocacy. Another thing that was really instrumental about that coach is he helped me to see that art and advocacy did not have to be separate, but they could be intertwined. So he often invited me to write my debate speeches in verse, right? So it would be poetry and sort of politics all playing at the same time. And I really think that that helps set a foundation for, the type of artist that I am, right? The second example is that my art teacher in high school was a nationally renowned muralist, right? So he has murals around the nation, a lot of them in Baltimore City. And as a teacher, first and foremost, he gave me my first feature as a poet. I'm in high school, never featured anywhere, and he drew this beautiful picture on a canvas, and he called me into his room after school and said, okay, I want you to look at this picture, and I want you to write a poem. And I was like, what? Right? I didn't know what that meant, but I did, and from there, I featured at one of his art galleries. It was an opening, and I did that poem with that picture, and it kind of set me on a path to feel like I was empowered, that I had voice, that I had agency, and I could use my art to explain the world around me, because that's what he was doing, right? I think that he showed me through his art that art can be responsive to injustice, that it can educate those who are unaware, right? And fast forward to today, I have been a spoken word performing artist for over 15 years. I've traveled across the world, and I come into spaces like this, and again, I'm still using my art intertwined with whatever argument or presentation that I'm trying to make, because I recognize the ability that art has to really make things plain for people, and make arguments that some people are not able to see vibrant. And so when I think about myself as a spoken word artist, I would describe myself as an artivist, right? So it's this kind of combined word, because I think that I live at the intersection of art and activism, right? And what does that mean? For me, I see myself as an extension of a Black radical tradition, from artists who created the New Negro movement, which many refer to now as the Harlem Renaissance, right? But the New Negro movement was a collection of scholars, of artists, of activists who were all working to build power and carve out a space for themselves in the world, right? So I see myself as an extension of that movement. I see myself as an extension of Amiri Baraka, whose art supported social movements like the Black Arts Movement in New York, right? I see myself as an extension of Emory Douglas, whose art supported creating political agendas. He was the visual artist for the Black Panther Party, right? And so many of those iconic images that associated with the Black Panthers were all created by Emory Douglas. So I see myself as an extension of folks like him, and James Baldwin, whose art was used to document the status quo and inspire change. A great example is a movie adaptation of If Beale Street Could Talk, which was originally written by James Baldwin, right? And so, I see myself as a student of these people, of these movements. And so the artivists of today are working to extend and carry the torch that they have lit for us. And so when I describe the function of artivism, a couple of things come to mind. First and foremost, we exist to raise awareness, right? There are a number of things that are wrong in society, a number of different kinds of injustices, and so the artivist uses their art in whatever art form they show up with to raise awareness about those things, right? I think the second thing is we increase empathy, right? Because sometimes in society, we have become so desensitized to what is happening that we can't feel for other people, especially if their struggle is outside of our purview. So the artist's role is to help increase empathy around things. I'll give you a prime example. If you think about the civil rights movement, those photographers who were able to capture those specific iconic moments that help people to see what was really happening when, German shepherds were let loose in a crowd full of children, right? they help to really tell that narrative through their photo essays, right? So sometimes we are useful in just increasing empathy. The third thing is to critique, right? Some things we just shouldn't be comfortable with in society. And sometimes you need somebody to step on your toe and make you say ouch. And that can be the role of the artist too. The fourth thing is to unify and inspire. I think that artists, again, as I mentioned earlier, has a unique potential to show the universality of the human experience. It's just an amazing gift that artists have. They allow us to see ourselves in other people, or to just show that as many differences as we like to show about ourselves, at the end of the day, we still bleed red blood and we cry when we're sad, and it's all right. Yeah? So oftentimes I think that it's our role to unify folks and then also inspire folks, whether it be to change or to just feel better, we inspire folks, right? And so I think the last thing that I'll add, though, is as a poet, sometimes my poetry is just about sharing my own truth and my own perspective, and sometimes I'm only writing for me. Even if I share it on a stage for 1,000 people, sometimes it was just about me, and as an artist, that's okay too. Because I believe the primary role of most art forms is to either be a mirror or a window, okay? Either a mirror or a window. Even when we're writing about ourselves, what do I mean? Sometimes I'm a mirror because I am holding up this mirror so that other people can see themselves when I'm speaking, when I'm performing, in this image, in this painting, right? Sometimes we just need to see ourselves represented so we know we're not alone in this world, right? If you take, the release of Black Panther as a movie, for a lot of people, it was just a mirror. It was wow. For the first time in a long time, I see myself represented on the big screen the way I see myself. Powerful, right? With ingenuity, right? It was amazing just to see yourself reflected the right way. So sometimes we are just mirrors. Sometimes we are windows, which means we open up a window and we allow folks who are outside of our community to peer into and understand better something that is not their experience. And that's okay too. And that can oftentimes be the catalyst to really important conversations. Because if nobody ever opens up that window, ever opens up that space, then how will folks know? People won't know how to treat you. People won't know what you have gone through, perhaps. People won't know how to help if we never have those open conversations. So sometimes the role of art can also just be a window, right? And so I want to use this window and mirror metaphor in also thinking about the function and role of diversity, because that's also true in art, right? You have artists that run the gamut, that are from all different kinds of communities, all different kinds of places, all different kinds of socioeconomic statuses from all across the world, right? So you'll find the most diversity in art forms. Now, whether all of those art forms get the same platform or attention is another conversation. But I promise you, you have artists who exist in every community, yeah? And so I want to use this metaphor of the mirror and the window to talk about diversity, right? I want to also share that I have 3 takeaways from this keynote because I know that there will be a call to action later, and I want to make sure that there are some things, at least from this talk, that folks can keep in mind as it relates to diversity. And so the 3 takeaways is that diversity as authority, diversity as resistance, and diversity as power. And we're going to talk about what those 3 things mean from my perspective, okay? So diversity, much like equality and inclusion and being woke, are hot-button topics right now. They are the perfect buzzwords that are littered across your timelines and your television screens. The issue with these phrases for me are that they're often empty, and they are typically not rooted in a long-standing school of thought that should be informing these conversations. People have been writing about these things for a very long time, but now that they are sexy and hip, it's just things that people say and don't, in my opinion, oftentimes know what it means. And that's okay. I think it gives us an opportunity to teach and learn together, but we have to first admit that sometimes we just use it because we hear other people using it. right? So I think another cliche in this same vein is the notion of the proverbial table, right? Everyone wants a seat at the table. Have you heard that phrase before? Raise your hand if you've heard that phrase. Okay, good, right? But what does that really mean? What does it mean to have a seat, to occupy a space, right? To me, having a seat means to have the ability to inform a conversation, to be able to set and alter the agenda, to have a leadership role, to dictate how money and resources are utilized, and the list goes on, right? Those are some things that come to mind if I use the proverbial table, okay? I don't know that that's true for others. And I think, unfortunately, many people are so happy with sitting at the table that they can't see that their seat at the table is ornamental, that they are a centerpiece, that they are decoration at best. Because what has happened is that universities, corporations, community councils, government agencies, and the like have all learned to play what I like to call diversity bingo, right? You have this board, and you know, I got to connect all of these dots, so I got to make sure that I have all of these people represented, right? There is quite literally a politically correct checklist that folks are just checking off to make sure that they have the right people included for the picture, for the photo op, yeah? And, you know, if you look, there are folks who are following this letter, you know, to the letter, excuse me. And for me, this isn't progressive. This is not revolutionary. This is not radical. It's just a waste of time. And why do I say that? I say it because it really is just the veneer of diversity without any substantive material change that comes with it. And for that, it's a waste of time on the part of all the people who are the ornaments at the table, right? If you were invited just for the photo op, it is a waste of your time. And so I often caution people of what tables they choose to sit at, because at some point you are giving validity to that organization, to that agency, to that university, to that company without reaping any benefit of being there yourself, especially if you are there to create some kind of change. But if you are not empowered in that space, then how is that change even being, you know, realized? So, I think that it brings me back to the example I gave about Baltimore's local government, right? A nearly 70% city. Black people, black legislature, black city council, black mayor, and some of the most extreme examples of police brutality in disenfranchised communities. That is an example of the diversity bingo. You got the right people at the table for the photo ops, but they are not empowered to make the kind of change that will reflect a community actually being better, a city actually being better, right? So that's an example of what I mean. Okay, so back to the first point, diversity as authority, okay? Audre Lorde has a quote that says, "If I didn't define myself for myself, I would be crunched into other people's fantasies of me and eaten alive." I start with this quote because when I talk about diversity as authority, what I mean to say is you are the authority on your experience, and that's important. Because when people are talking about how to be more responsive to issues regarding black folks, or issues regarding indigenous folks, or issues regarding sexual and gender minorities, or issues regarding insert whatever community you represent, they need you to be authentic and help them to understand what they cannot. You are the authority. And too often what you will find is that folks who are not from or of those communities, because they have resources, will write 1,000 white papers and books and studies without actually having spoken to a person who has lived that experience their entire life, right? And so it's necessary that, again, if you are gonna ask for a seat at the table, your seat at the table needs to be clear that you are the authority. And it's not too much to ask for that, because that's the reason they invited you there in the first place. For the folks in the room who are table setters, This is something to also keep in mind. When you invite someone to sit at your table because they represent a certain minority, or because they have a certain perspective, or because they are an expert in a certain thing, you have to let them be the expert. You cannot overshadow their opinions because maybe they're young, or because maybe they don't have the kind of respectability politics that makes you comfortable, because your comfort should take a back seat to them being at the table and authentically being able to be themselves, okay? So that brings me to another thing that happens when we are at these tables, at these mixed multicultural tables. I like to call it the oppression Olympics. So one of the things that happens is, because many of us are intersectional, meaning, you know, for myself, I started with describing myself as a black, cis, het woman, right? Those are some of my intersecting identities, right? We all have them. Sometimes we do this thing where it's like my oppression is worse than your oppression. And it isn't that funny or isn't that apparent, but it's oftentimes happening. There is this competition of whose oppression should be prioritized in the conversation, who gets to take up the most space, whose dialogue is more important, who we should do the research on first, right? And we have to get away from this dynamic, because what it does is it cripples the entire conversation. It makes sure that we are never gonna accomplish anything, because now all we're doing is infighting, right? Because we feel like our situation is more important than someone else's. And the truth is oppression no matter how it shows up. And we have to get to the point where we can understand that so that we can move and we can grow. And that sometimes means that a space may not be designed to be a multicultural space. And I know that makes people uncomfortable. And I know it makes people, you know, squint their eyes and tighten their jaw. But the truth is, when there are too many different kinds of people in a conversation, sometimes you're not able to focus on any particular thing. And so it's okay to have, you know, a space where it's just for black women, or a space where it's just for sexual and gender minorities. And then there could be subspaces for, you know what, only for non-binary folks, or only for trans folks, or only, you know, the list is long. And it's okay to have spaces designed just for you, so you can come to the understanding about what it is that you want to work towards, how you can empower each other and build community. That is okay. And that is far different than, you know, this country's long-standing history of racism and discrimination. Those things are different. It's okay to have community and build amongst yourselves. And it's okay to tell some folks, this table is not for you. This conversation is not for you. We got the multicultural conversation next week, and we invite you to take part of that. But this one is just for this community. It's okay. It is okay. And, you know, I think that it's taken a long time for me to understand the difference between the two, having been a person that's been excluded from so many spaces, or seeing folks from my community be excluded from so many spaces. I recognize the difference is those communities that I'm describing are not wielding any particular power as a result of building that community. They are not trying to disenfranchise anyone from having that community exist. In fact, they are building their own power and affirming themselves in the existence of that community, right? And so those are the kind of communities we should be seeking to build, while the others are the kinds we should be seeking to dismantle. All right, so the next thing that I want to describe, it fits right in that same dynamic, is that there are times when we can't see that we can be both privileged and oppressed at the same time. Again, that's how intersectionality works, okay? So I'm gonna give you two examples. One example, you might be a white, wealthy person who is also a sexual and gender minority. So you are experiencing both privilege and oppression in this country simultaneously. Another example, I'll take myself, right? Educated, cis, het, black woman, right? On the one hand, I have 2 degrees, that's a privilege, right? I am cisgendered and heterosexual in this country, also a privilege. but I'm also black and woman and doubly oppressed, right? We have to recognize that dynamic in the rooms that we sit in and make sure that the places where we are privileged do not become blind spots for us. And that we are not taking up so much space in a room or discounting the opinions and authority of the other folks in the room simply because we are operating from the place of our privilege. It's a hard conversation to have. And it's one you have to have every day internally with yourself to make sure that you are, don't get me wrong, embracing the fullness of your identity, but also making sure that you are not being an oppressor in that moment. That you are not making small out of someone in that moment. And you are always creating opportunities to learn and to develop and to grow. Yeah? Okay. So a couple of takeaways from this diversity as authority is when you are in that space, okay, it is helpful, especially for the table setters, it is helpful to step back often. You do not have to lead from the front. You can be a leader and be in the back. You can be an ally and be all the way in the back, and it is okay, especially if a part of your work is empowering these disempowered communities. You can't say, I want to help empower women and be a white man at the front. It is antithetical to the movement that you say you are trying to create, okay? So we have to be considerate of the ways that we can step back and empower other people, right? In that same vein, you should be calling on those most affected to speak, right? I can't tell you how many times I've been in spaces where it's like I was asked to come and do a poem like Black Girl Beautiful because I'm a black woman and they wanted me to affirm the other black women in the room, and then all the other speakers were white men. And it's like, but, okay. Right? So we have to make sure that we are stepping back often, okay? The next thing is that step back often, call on those most affected, but also, again, for the table setters, don't ask these people to be your mule. I don't know if you've heard of, the I am not your mule hashtag. What that means is just because you invited those folks to sit at your table, or to help build a table, a multicultural table, or to help be on a council, does not mean that they then work for you, or that they are your research project, or that any given day or time you can call on them to be the representative for their entire community. That is not how it works. And they do not owe you that. You have to be able to do your own research on your own time. They are not your pocketed Wikipedia person that you call every time you want them to define some term, or you had some experience that you're like, let me call Breon, because I know she's going to tell me, I don't know what that meant that black girl said, but she's a black girl, so she knows. That is not our function, okay? So you have to be, and it is not to say that they can't sometimes help you to understand, of course. But the I am not your mule movement means that too often the assumption is that's what we exist for. And if I'm trying to build power and get free on my own, I don't have time to help you do the same. You have to do that work on your own as well. You have to pull your weight as well. And if this is some kind of allyship, you should know the difference. And when somebody checks you and says that you're doing the most, you have to respect that and not take it as, a shot at you or disrespect and say, okay, let me reevaluate how I'm engaging in this relationship. That's what coalition looks like. That's what community building looks like. It's not easy, but it's necessary. Yeah? Okay. So the next thing is diversity as resistance. Okay? So the dominant culture is only empowered as long as it is in control, right? Therefore, they will hand you hot combs and bleaching cream. They will ask you to melt your flair and color into neutrality. They will make you small and a quiet thing. They will ban your religion into illegality. They will fold and stuff you into the smallest mass-produced box they can make, because that is how that dominant culture remains in control, which means the more you show up wholly and authentically and unashamed, the more we resist, right? The consistent presence of anything outside of the heteronormative structure is a disruption and is also a good thing. It may not feel like it at the time. It may be difficult, but it is a good thing. That discomfort, again, it's not easy. In fact, it's exhausting, but it's still necessary. And when you find yourself in that room, again, for the table setters or the bystanders, and you are witnessing erasure, or you are witnessing discrimination, or you are witnessing prejudice, or you are witnessing insert other isms that will happen, right? It should be your role to, one, not put the onus on the victim to call it out. Because if you're sitting there cognizant and watching it happen, but also waiting for the victim of the situation to stand up for themselves, you are complicit. You are perpetuating that dynamic because you said nothing, right? So if, I'm in a room and I'm experiencing erasure and there are all these other folks in the room who know what's happening and they don't stand in for me, can I really call them an ally? Are we really in community? Are we really in coalition? If I got to always do the work by myself, then I'm in community by myself. The second thing is, you have to be willing to bend your privilege toward injustice, or towards justice, right? And what that means is, and it's sort of just an extension of what I just said, but there are times when, I'll give you an example. In Baltimore, I was invited, an organization that I'm creating was invited to participate in a fundraiser. So I'm going to talk about this in a second, but I'm building a Black Arts and Entertainment District in West Baltimore. And it is thank you. It is a really hard and tedious process, but there are folks who are recognizing the work and want to help us by raising money and et cetera. So a bordering community association said we want to throw a fundraiser. It was during Black History Month. They said, oh, this is apropos, Black Arts District, Black History Month fundraiser. And so their idea was that everyone would get up and they would share different presentations of art by Black artists. Now, this is a predominantly white community. I should have prefaced with that. So most of the people there are non-Black. But I was like, okay, this could be interesting, right? So at the beginning of the night, it was cool. Everybody was doing poems or monologues and what have you. And so there's one gentleman who was the leader of a Catholic church, and he got up and he read an excerpt from a book written by a Black woman who leads one of the large art institutions in Baltimore. And there's a scene in this monologue where a white woman is calling out her husband for, I don't even know what was happening. It was like he was discriminating on this Black woman, and so the usage of the N-word was in this conversation. And he went full throttle and just screamed the N-word. And I'm just looking around the room because I'm like, what is happening? But no one batted an eye. It really was just me. And so I said, okay, this is one of those moments where you can't let it go by. You have to address this. And so I went to pull this gentleman aside. And at the moment, I noticed there was another Black woman already having the exact same conversation. So I just kind of, dovetailed. And then, we all go back into the room. And it wasn't until like maybe an hour later where a white woman who was one of the leaders of the Bolton Hill, that was a community association, is like, okay, I don't know if it made anybody else feel uncomfortable, but that moment where this happened, can we talk about it? And I felt so relieved because I wasn't interested in taking on the whole room. I was not interested in having to fight the opinions of everybody in that room because it wasn't my community. It wasn't my event. I was a guest. And I'm like, they're not going to want to support my effort anymore. If I come here and the first time they meet me, I read everybody for filth. So it was one of those moments where I could finally take a breath. I was relieved. And I give you that example to say there are always going to be moments where you can be that woman. You can decide, look, this is uncomfortable, but come on, y'all. We got to get ourselves together. Okay? The last example that I'm going to give, the last takeaway, and then I'll be open for a few questions, is, oh no, I have one other example. I'm going to give you one other example. So I talked about the Baltimore uprising, right? Raise your hand if you heard about the Baltimore uprising, right? So after the death of Freddie Gray, there was an insurgence of nonviolent protests and a number of actions that happened in the city. And I remember one particular instance where there was a line of National Guards and policemen that was right in front, that was trying to stop a line of protesters. And to be honest, we were scared because things were getting out of hand. Although just about all of the protests were nonviolent, people were being beaten, people were being taken to jail. It was getting out of hand. And what happened when we talk about bending your privilege towards justice or standing with and affirming things that are happening, this is an example that I give. There was a group of white folks who went out onto the front line of the rally. They all made a barricade between us and the police barricade. And if you've never been at rallies or protests, then you don't know how serious that is. The difference between a front line of black folks and a front line of white folks is that everybody might go home from one, while folks probably will not go home from the other. So it was, it was one of my most vivid memories of seeing white folks literally putting their bodies on the line and standing in between us and that police force and bending their privilege towards justice, because they know it's a different kind of scandal if a group of middle-aged white women are beaten by the police rather than a group of young black people. It is a very different headline in which the police do not want. And so we were able to pass, dismantle, and go home, right? That's an example. And maybe that's not your forte. Maybe it's a little less hostile, but it's just an example that I want you to be able to take away and say, okay, let me think how I can stand in between. And I don't want to overly romanticize it and make it seem like you are expected to be the superhero as an ally, because that is not the case. It is not that in every instance you want to jump up and take all the space and put on your red cape and say, I am Superman, I am Superwoman. That is not what I am articulating at all. But there are some instances where it is very clear that if you are going to be in coalition, allyship, or what have you, there are moments when, if you are honest and being truthful about the help that you are trying to provide, there are times when it makes sense for you to stand in on that person's behalf. And if you don't know the difference, talk with those folks that you're in community with or allyship with. I promise you they'll tell you the difference. So the last thing is diversity, right, as a form of autonomy and building power. So we talked about this proverbial table. And again, the difference between being ornamental and actually being in a leadership role at those tables is the power dynamics, okay? If you don't experience the ability to build power at these tables, that is not a table you should be at. It is a waste of your time, okay? So sometimes I have a friend, poet back in Baltimore, and his mantra is, I no longer ask to sit at tables, I simply take them. That's his new mantra. And what he means is, if I'm going to have a seat at this table, then I'm going to change the power dynamic such that this table no longer belongs to whatever entity that needed my presence at the table in the first place, because obviously the power dynamic was off. So you have to figure out, what does it look like for you to build power for yourself, for your community, and those who you are in community with, right? And sometimes, you're going to have to fight for respect, have to carve out a space for yourself. Respectability politics, gender politics, all that stuff really comes into play when you are trying to carve out a space for yourself. And you have to be able to do it. So the example that I want to use, and I just mentioned it, is the building of this Black Arts and Entertainment District. It is literally an attempt to create our own table. It is an attempt to define our community for us and by us. to determine the trajectory of development in our community, to be able to access resources that will revitalize a community that's been disinvested in and impoverished for decades. It is us doing the very difficult and political work of going to this black legislature and city council and mayor and asking them to actually do work on behalf of the city that they represent and the communities that have been overlooked for very long, right? This is an example of diversity and power. And if you have one but not the other, your work is not done, because they have to both exist at the same time. Otherwise, we perpetuate the status quo. If we have diversity, but all those folks that represent diversity still don't have power, then that white heteronormative structure is still in place, and it still makes all the decisions, right? It still controls the media, the narrative, right? And there's so our material community, our material existence is not altered. And the goal is to be able to define what we need, what we want, and who we are for ourselves. And that is power, right? Thank you. So I will end, y'all clap just a little bit too soon, okay? No. So I want to end with a poem by, not by myself this time, by one of my sheroes, who was one of, if I'm not mistaken, the first black woman poet laureate in the state of Maryland. And her name is Lucille Clifton. And I think that this poem is apropos because this world is designed to squelch diversity, right? It is designed to kill all forms of differences, again, because you have power when you can dictate how everybody has to show up and how they have to operate in the world. If nobody can exist outside of you, you are in control, right? So you must squelch or kill anything that is a divergence from the culture that you have created. And it's a celebration because we're still here despite of that. And so I end with this poem by Lucille Clifton called Won't You Celebrate With Me? Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model, born in Babylon, both non-white and woman. What did I see to be except myself? I made it up here on this bridge between starshine and clay, my one hand holding tight, my other hand. Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and failed. Thank you all so much. So I did really good. I'm right at the 12:30 mark. So if anyone has any questions, I'm open to take a few, or I could just take a seat. Yes. Okay, I usually like to summarize, but that was a lot of things. So I don't know if I'm going to say it exactly how you said it, but there are a few things that I heard you say. So one is, how do you define allyship? Okay, that was the umbrella of the question. And some of the things that came up was that some people are like, we'll accept your help, but you'll never be one of us. And but that assumes that the goal isn't to be in community and have the same goals and be on one accord, right? And so, when you said that, one of the things in my mind, I was like, oh, you're right. But that's not a bad thing. To say we will accept your help, but you will never be one of us is essentially what allyship is. We are different, and that is okay. But we have to embrace our differences and come together and figure out how do we leverage that and create some kind of synergy that can help all, the boats to float and rise, right? Like, I think that, again, when people say statements like that, it is really from a place of insecurity and really from a place of needing to be in charge or in the front or in control. Because otherwise, if I am a Black woman and I decide that I want to, in some way, for whatever reason, help a group of, I don't know, Latina women who are specifically focusing on bettering the agricultural landscape in their community. I don't live there. I'm not Latina. And I'm a woman, but I don't live there. I'm not Latina, and I'm there to help. I should be able to expect that I will never be Latina or live there, and it's okay, right? Like, I don't have to insert myself into their community, be an ally. I see their struggle. I think it is valid. I want to help. Tell me how. And if you say it just means be a sustainer and give $10 every month because we are crowdsourcing, I will give my $10 if I want to help. Or if you say, I love the way you write poems, would you interview us and write a poem that we're going to use in this way? If I can do it, I will. Or if you say, we're having a rally and we want you to be in attendance, if I can, I will. But if I say I want to be an ally, then I can't set the terms of my allyship, right? And I think that too often that's what people want. People want to decide to be an ally and also lead the movement in which it's not theirs. And that's a fundamental flaw in allyship, and I think it's also why people have moved past that word, because that's what it triggers for people. That's what it means to people. Now, I'm a poet, and I feel like some things are just semantics, so I could use different words, but ally is the word that most people know, so I choose to use it. But there are others, right, that in certain spaces I might use. But the truth is, how are we going to be in community with folks that are unlike us? And in some ways, we have to listen to them. How do they want to be in relationship with us? That's how any relationship works when it's healthy. And so I don't see it as a bad thing. I just think that we have to do more to understand each other and understand boundaries and understand limits and be okay with that. Any other questions? That was a real long answer, sorry. Any other questions? No? Yes. Mm-hmm. So again, remember my second point was diversity as resistance. And sometimes your very presence in a place says a lot. And it does a lot to ensure that people are holding themselves accountable. Because sometimes there's certain things that won't be said or done when you are in the room. And so there are times when, like you said, maybe you are not able to shape the conversation fully, but there's an inside and outside game. So sometimes you are there to ensure that what is being created is not going to be something that is going to negatively impact your community, right? Sometimes you are there just to hear what is being said and to learn, right? It's not always a power move. It's not always you needing to be in leadership, because sometimes that's inappropriate. So I don't want to, none of the things that I have mentioned are absolute. And none of them will work across the board, right? There are certain places and certain times for certain things, and you have to be able to figure out the difference because it's situational. And so I think, to your point, when you're talking about initially building a movement, a lot of that is just figuring out what you want to do anyway. So it's really that most of the people at the table aren't really at a position of power. You haven't even figured out who makes sense to lead it yet. So I think in those spaces, that's absolutely fine, but it's necessary that you be there. Yes. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yes, the answer is yes. And I would say defer to whoever you are in the room with. If someone tells you that, then that's it, right? Like if you are constantly getting feedback that you are taking up too much space, or you are leading to other people feeling erased, feeling disempowered, the list goes on, that is an example, or that should be, you know, proof positive that maybe you should take a step back, because essentially what they're saying is you should take a step back, right? So I think sometimes we just have to be better listeners and ask better questions, because oftentimes some of the things that we're seeking to learn, people have already been saying in all the rooms that you've been in, but you just didn't have an ear to hear it. So I think that, yes, there is an example of too much help. You know, and it sounds crazy because, you know, help is helpful, but sometimes it is not. And sometimes it becomes problematic. Like we can, you know, even think about romantic relationships. Like sometimes the love can be overbearing. I got boundaries, right? So, you know, love is good until it's overbearing, right? So, take that example as metaphor, as analogous for your help in coalition building or movement building. Sometimes it can become problematic. I don't know why I whispered that. Okay, here and then here. Mm-hmm. Ooh, that's good. That's a good question. I should just start bringing a list so I don't have to think off the top of my head. Some of my favorite sheroes and authors. So I'm an artist, so most of my folks are like artists, and I don't know what folks are interested in this room, so I don't want to give you a list of my favorite artists who are also activists, and that may not work for you. But, you know, I definitely, you know, I love Toni Morrison's Playing in the Dark, which is, again, this is an artist who is critiquing the ways in which the academy or, you know, the white literary canon can be problematic and dismissive of, like, Black voices and even in the characters that they create. So that was helpful for me, you know, because in part I'm an academic too, so that was helpful. Or, you know, texts by Audre Lorde, June Jordan have been very helpful in me understanding, because they are both artists, but they also have these critical texts that were helpful and based in race relations. I think about James Baldwin is another great writer who has both, you know, fictional, artistic texts, but also critical essays that I think are helpful. And a lot of these people are not, you know, it's funny because none of them are living, but you read those texts and they're so timely right now. Because the truth is, for all the technology and generations of the iPhone, as it relates to race relations, we have not come very far, right? So there is progression in a lot of ways, and we've been standing still in other ways. So those are a few. I don't know, if I could think a little bit more, I probably could have some that are not art-based, but those are the folks that come to mind right now. Oh, it was a, yes. Yeah, that's a good question. So it was, at a lot of these events, we're often preaching to the choir. These are folks who are already trying to be allies or are already in coalition or communities with, you know, that are multicultural spaces, what have you. So sometimes it's just preaching to the choir. How do we break out beyond these groups to folks who really need to hear it, who are not a part of these conversations? So great question. So I'll say two things. One, although I think that sometimes it can feel like preaching to the choir, you know, I think about the way in which the brain retains information, or like even thinking about, you know, young children, how they develop. You have to say it 10,000 times before it actually sticks. And so I used to be that person that was always using that, you know, that phrase, preaching to the choir. But the truth is, I feel like we have to constantly have these conversations and constantly grow and develop. And the way one person says it may not resonate the way another person says it. So I want to encourage you all to continue to be in these spaces and not say, I've heard it once, I've heard it all, right? We don't have to have these conversations anymore. Because the more you grow and develop, the more you will receive these kinds of conversations differently, and they might be more helpful, 2 years from now than it was today, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I mean, as a poet, that is the story of my life, having conversations in spaces with people who did not ask me to talk about whatever it is in my poem. Like they're thinking, oh, she's going to get up and do a love poem. And it's like, no, mass incarceration. So sometimes it is just taking it upon yourself to plant those seeds, knowing that you may not be the one that sees them blossom and grow, but planting the seed is still necessary. And in that moment, they might not respond in the most receptive way, but that doesn't mean they didn't hear you. And sometimes it wasn't the time that they could hear you, right? Sometimes you got to meet people where they are and recognize that they are not about to be a revolutionary tomorrow, and that is okay. But meeting them where they are, having the conversation in a way that they can understand it, not using all of the jargon that you've learned or all of the, like not putting yourself on a pedestal and looking down on them, because they will never receive the information that way, but recognizing that you had to grow to this moment, and they are maybe a few decades behind, perhaps, and that's okay, but meeting them where they are and helping, like I said, to plant that seed and hoping that it'll bloom. That's the best advice I can give. It's never easy. Okay, so thank you all again. Yes. I just wanted to say I'm a poet, and this is what I do professionally, and so I do have a book and an audio experience, like a download card of my poetry. That was my thesis project for my master's program, so it's both a literary and auditory experience. If anybody is interested in taking some of my work home with you, it's out on the registration table. Okay, I'm really walking away this time. Thank you all.
Can we give another huge round of applause to Lady Brian? That was truly amazing, and we are so lucky to have you here. Thank you so much for speaking today. We really appreciate it. So, breakout sessions will resume at 1 p.m., but before then, we have a lot of food to eat, so get cracking. Please eat the food. There's so much. But other than that, the last breakout sessions will conclude at 3 p.m., and then we'll meet back here for a final call to action, and I would really love to see all of you there. So enjoy the rest of the presentations, enjoy the rest of the food, and have a lovely afternoon until 3 p.m. Thanks.